Donald Trump has spent much of his relatively short time in politics railing against Barack Obama's signature piece of legislation.
We will repeal and replace disastrous Obamacare.
But nearly 1 year into his 4-year term as US president, that central campaign pledge still eludes him. His fellow Republican, Senator John McCain, ended hopes for a so-called skinny repeal in the US Congress in July with this simple gesture. Even though attempts to repeal Obamacare can sometimes look like political theatre here in Washington, for many people in this country, healthcare policy is quite literally a matter of life and death. On the other side of America, in Denver, Doug Ingley suffers from a rare spinal condition that requires him to have infusions every 3 weeks. If lawmakers in Washington remove protections for pre-existing conditions, Doug and his wife could be forced to move to another country so he can continue treatment.
Our roots are here, and our families are here, and our support system is here with all of our friends, and it's daunting and it's scary to think that we may have to move elsewhere just to live as normal of a life as I can or as we can.
Doug's wife, Kylie, has a simple question for the president.
What deems my husband, because he was born with something, because something was out of his hands, out of his control, by no doing of his own, what deems him unworthy of being cared for?
The White House says replacing Obamacare would force insurance companies to compete for customers, lower their premiums, and improve care. Republicans also argue that the Affordable Care Act is locked in a death spiral. But healthcare analyst Matthew Fiedler says there's no evidence to support that.
The crux of this claim is that healthy people are fleeing the market in such droves that insurers are going to have to raise premiums so much that even more healthy people will leave, so they'll have to raise premiums yet again. And because most of the market receives these subsidies and are protected from increases in premiums, that helps keep this sort of vicious cycle from getting off the ground.
We are going to sign some very important things today.
But the tax reform package which President Trump signed into law last week abolishes Obamacare's requirements that all Americans take out health insurance. Some analysts predict that removing the so-called individual mandate will take healthy Americans out of the insurance pool and would indeed condemn the Affordable Care Act to a slow death. As Trump looks ahead to 2018, the question is whether he will keep chipping away at parts of his predecessor's signature legislation or roll the dice on yet another attempt to repeal it in Congress. Giles Gibson, TRT World, Washington.
For more on this, I'm joined by Max Wolff from New York. He's chief economist at Disruptive Technology Advisers, and from Paris, our editor-at-large, Craig Copetas. Welcome to you both. Max, I want to start with you, if I may. Now that some of the dust has settled from the Trump Tax Act, are you more or less optimistic about its success and its impact on the US economy?
Yeah, so I'd say that I am more optimistic that it will have an impact. I am not optimistic about what that impact will be. I think we know pretty clearly that there have been some groups that have been disproportionately favored or helped by the way the economy has evolved the last 8 or 9 years. Those groups are largely our biggest, most globally prominent companies and our wealthiest individuals. And somewhat strangely, those groups were taken by surprise, by, like everyone else, by this populist upsurge in the United States that helped to elect Donald Trump. And those groups now just got most or almost all of the benefit of this stimulus. So 8 years into an expansion, we gave a massive stimulus to the people that we factually, unambiguously know need it least, in a time when there's massive rage from everyone else that they didn't get that stimulus, and we have to hope that what didn't work last time does next time. And I think Albert Einstein had a nice quote about how one should look at people who make that assumption.
So you're no more convinced about trickle-down economics now than you were a few months ago, then?
No, I think the first 37 years of data is somewhat conclusive in my mind.
Trump still wants to make more cuts to welfare spending in the coming 12 months, and he wants to boost infrastructure spending as well. How successful is he going to be in doing all of this?
Well, I mean, I think the priorities are pretty clear. The big important thing was to open up a $1 to $2 trillion hole in the budget, which last time I checked was already underwater and already problematically so, with deficits in the $500 billion run range and, you know, nearing $18 trillion worth of total debt, or 20 depending on how we do the count. So I don't see exactly how we're going to be able to do that. And put it this way, if we're going to do anything big infrastructure-wise, it's going to mean even bigger cuts to Medicaid and discretionary programs, and I'm not sure that there won't be at some point where we've reached the breaking point, so I'm less optimistic about a big program. I'm more likely would assume that we're going to get a headline program, and this is a very headline-sensitive president. He's good with manipulating media attention, less seemingly interested and adept at passing legislation.
Right. Thank you very much for that, Max. Max Wolff there. Craig, if I may turn to you, what do Europeans that you come across where you are say about what's happening in the US in terms of both policymakers and ordinary people? How do they see the changes that Trump is administering to the economy in the US?
Well, if you're a European corporate head, you love it because the new Trump tax bill is giving $78 billion in tax cut benefits to foreign corporations in the U.S. and only $28 billion in tax cut benefits to Americans in the U.S. That should be flipped around, but you know the European corporate meisters are jumping for joy. This is a really great deal. On top of that, I completely agree with Max's assessment. Trickle down works for a year, and the country will get drunk on trickle down, and then it is going to change. But again, how that impacts here in Europe, we're seeing more and more Europeans wanting to move to the United States because that's where the money is. It's not here.
Interesting.
Particularly young Europeans.
Craig Copetas in Paris and Max Wolff in New York. Thank you both very much indeed.